Good morning, everyone, and good evening to friends and colleagues joining from Asia. I'm Qing Gao. I'm a professor and director of the China Center for Social Policy at Columbia University. Welcome, everyone. Today, we have an important and exciting conversation that will take place. Our guest speaker today is Rong Xiaoqing, who is a reporter and the author of the New York Times weekly newsletter, Overseas Chinese Journal. When she agreed to do this with me, I was excited and honored because I have been a loyal reader of her writing long before she started this column. She writes both in Chinese and English and has a wide following worldwide. I think the topic is so timely and important. We do this at Columbia because we have a series called Asia in Action, Knowledge and Inclusion in a Time of Fear and Ignorance. We started this during the pandemic because we increasingly see the division, the worries, the fear that's happening in our society around us. So we want to have a series of conversations to talk it through and find a solution, find a future for all of us. So today's conversation focuses on a theme very dear to me, very dear and near to my heart, the dilemma of the Chinese diaspora in the decoupling era. I think many of you in the audience care about this very much as well. So without further ado, we will delve into the conversation. I invite Rong Xiaoqing to begin by sharing her perspective about why she proposed this topic and what has been on her mind in the past few years, especially in the past half a year while she has been authoring this amazing column. Xiaoqing, please.
Yeah, sure. A lot of crazy ideas on my mind in the past few years and especially half year. But let me starting with my name. Yes, Rong Xiaoqing. That's my my whole name, and that's how I put my byline. People who know me, the Chinese would call me Xiaoqing, but in this country, I often introduce myself as Rong. The way I do that, the reason I do that is because that I found a lot of people in this country don't know how to pronounce a word starting with an X. So I thought this might be easier. I'll just say, hey, yeah, my name is Rong. Just call me Rong. It sounds like wrong, W-R-O-N-G. So if you call me Rong, you're right. It sounds confusing, but this is a confusing time for Chinese living in the US, no matter how do you spell your name or what name style you follow. I remember that in 2005, when Robert Zelik called China a stakeholder in a keynote speech at the National Committee of US-China Relations, at their annual gala. I was there. I was like enjoying my free dinner with a bunch of reporters covering the event. When we heard that word, we almost had our jaw drop on the plate because that was the first time any U.S. official called China with such a friendly term. We never expected the U.S. will send out a message, such an important message at something we thought it might be just a routine speech. But after that, the optimism spread further very quickly. And it didn't take long for a new word to be minted, Chimerica. You remember that? It sounds like an antique now, like centuries old. I think like it's confusing for, confusing at any time for someone living in a culture that's not the culture you grew up with. But it might be 100 times more so when the two cultures, or say the political body that embodied the two cultures, consider each other as, I quote the phrase that you might have heard a lot of times from the American officials, competitive strategic competitors. It is necessary to put a footnote here that China has rejected this label, but another term has been widely accepted by both sides, decoupling. So after Zelik, after the America, soon there was Trump, there was the trade war. But at least by the summer of 2019, I can still feel hope was still sparkling. I remember at that time I interviewed Zhao, who is a Yale graduate and a co-founder of the Chinese fast casual food chain, Junzi Kitchen. We talked about Nixon's 1972 trip to China and how the banquet Zhou Enlai hosted for Nixon triggered a fever for Chinese food in the US. And Zhao Yun said, food is actually the least sensitive part in the US-China relations. So if one day the two countries want to cool things down, probably President Xi Jinping and President Trump can come to Junzi and to have their talks, because Junzi provide Chinese food and we hire American employees. Why not? But of course, at that time, no one had expected that something called COVID would hit soon. So when COVID came, there was the words, the Chinese virus, promoted by Trump and his officials in his administration. And then there was the anti-Asian hate wave, or I should say there is the anti-Asian hate wave because it's still going on. So now when I think back to the words stakeholder, America, and think back to the days that full of hope and passion and possibilities, it all sounds like a long time ago. The reality is stark. As Chinese living in this country, you can feel it even more vividly and palpable. I think like when people talk about the word decoupling, they always say, oh, it's just like a divorce. But in a divorce, when the parents move on to their own path, they would also, both of them would tell the children often, like, we still love you. But for Chinese living in this country, it's easily for you to feel that neither country loves you no more. In the US, I remember in the early 2018, Christopher Wray, the FBI director, said in a testimony at a Senate committee that all Chinese students and scholars in this country are non-traditional collectors to steal information for China. And then at the end of that year, the Department of Justice launched their China initiative to crack down economic espionage from China. So students, scholars, and scientists in this country feel like they are put under tightening scrutiny more and more. Some of them are even labeled as spies. But Chinese living in America also have to face risks from their home country. When the nationalism is rising over there and the anti-American sentiment as well, everything they said on social media or in public speech, or if they're quoted by traditional media, could be put under a microscope by the nationalistic netizens to look for a new target to promote their propaganda. One example is Chloe Jiao, the Oscar-winning director. After she got her big awards, 2 interviews she made years ago was dug up by netizens in China. In one, she said, I'm from China, which is a country full of lies. In the other, she said, America is now my country. But the second line indeed was a misquote by the publication. She actually said, America is not my country. And then so when it came out, it printed as America is now my country. And the publication actually had published a correction, but it didn't matter. She still became the target of troll. Nationality has become such a sensitive topic. not only Chloe Zhao, but even Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei, who was house detained in Canada for 3 years and was just released and returned to China recently, has to face this question. Meng Wanzhou's returning to China actually is considered as a big victory by China. But still, some people online are saying, hey, she is a Canadian now. Why should China celebrate her release? By the way, a spokesperson from the foreign ministry said that she is still a Chinese citizen. In the 1980s, there's a song that went viral in China after it was presented in CCTV Lunar New Year Gala called My Chinese Heart. The lyric goes that although I dress in Western suit, but my heart is still a Chinese heart. The audience went crazy. They were so touched. But now the common sentiment over there is, if you still have a Chinese heart, why do you have to put on a Western suit? Last year, I wrote a piece for the New York Times Chinese site. This is not part of the newsletter. It was before that, about how like more Chinese are declaring publicly that they're breaking up from China. For some of them, they just hate the CCP. And in China's context, the party is the country. So they said, I'm breaking up with the country. But for other people, this is merely a survival strategy. They feel they have been pushed into a corner that they have to choose sides. But how well this strategy will work, I don't know, because how do you expect people with xenophobia and racism to tell apart Chinese who are still Chinese citizens and Chinese Americans, or between Chinese who vowed to be loyal only to America and those who have their feet in two worlds? As a reporter, my job is to tell the truth. It sounds easy because there's one truth, right? But in today's extremely polarized world, there is always the question that whose truth are you telling? So that translates into everyday questions like, who am I writing for? Or who is my audience? Does it give a piece of truth more or less weight if I write it for a publication in China or publication in the US? Or if I write it for an ethnic media outlet or a mainstream media outlet here? Or as a reporter who's telling the truth, does it matter that if I'm from ethnic media, an ethnic community and a foreign country? I'm sorry for dumping you all these questions that I don't have answers, but I guess like in the end, Chinese living in the US have to face the same philosophical question that all human beings have to face. That is, who am I? It's just like the current situation offered more urgency to Chinese living in this country to find the answer. So I look forward to discuss further with Professor Gao and the audience. But before I hand the floor back to Professor Gao, I'd like to sneak in a small advertisement. I'm gonna put the subscription link of our newsletter in the chat box. It's fun, at least we're trying to make it's a fun rate, and it's free. So there aren't so much like free lunch even with the media today. So please check us out. Oh, you just need to put your email address. You don't have to do much. All right, back to you, Professor.
Thank you so much. Now you put me in a difficult spot. I don't know how to call you anymore, right? By Xiaoqing or by Rong.
Oh, call me anything you like.
This is so interesting because usually when I communicate with the Xiaoqing, I call her Rong Jizhe, so reporter Rong, very respectfully. But in English, we don't usually do that. So in any case, I'm so glad to have this opportunity to delve into some of the issues we've been pondering individually and together. So let me start with this, Xiaoqing. You wrote that you came to this country about 20 years ago before September 11th happened. And that's about the same time I came to this country. So just looking back the 20 years, quite amazing in one's own life journey, quite amazing in the US and China's journeys and the world transitions. So I want to invite you to reflect upon those 20 years in terms of your reporting, your writing, and in terms of the people you interacted with in your reporting, who you interview, how you conducted the interviews, and the people, whether they stay about the same, did they change? What kind of experience would you share with our audience about those 20 years? And I mean, on top of that, how did that experience shape your own identity and your own writing in that process? Thanks.
Yeah, Professor Gao, you're right. I came to this country in 2000. So a year after September 11th happened. So
I'm sorry, a year before, right? A year before?
A year
Yes.
after I came to this country. I came in 2000.
Oh, right.
So September 11th happened when I was still like, you can say a baby in this country. You know, I didn't know anything about this world, about the city even. So when September 11th happened, I guess like everyone in New York had the same feeling. We witnessed the same sadness on the street everywhere, every corner. You see the pictures, you see the people crying, you know, like looking for their loved ones. That fundamentally changed me. I guess anyone come to New York sooner or later would learn to embrace the diversity. But for me, it happened quite early. It only took a year. At that moment, when I saw those people with, you know, different skin colors, but they all had the same kind of sadness, I realized the differences between people from different race, from different countries are really minimal compared to the commonness among them. So that basically shaped my work view. I would say probably for the second time, because it has already formed when I was in China. So I kind of like followed this principle that you know, everyone is the same. We're all human beings. In my reporting, like, you know, all the stories I wrote is about, I think most of them are about human lives. You know, sometimes under great pressures, sometimes when they were pushed at the corner. How do people react? That's the thing that I really care about the most. In the 20 years, of course, the Chinese community has changed a lot, because when I first came here, almost the only voice is the liberal Chinese Americans' voice. Most of them support the Democratic Party. But then through the past maybe past 10 years, but especially the past 5 years and the past 2 years, this community has become more and more diverse. And the voices, there are so many voices. And then the conservative part of Chinese has been rising. Their voices are getting louder. So that, you know, for me, it's just a very interesting thing that, you know, it's an exciting moment to cover. You know, it's a community that has been the same for decades, and now suddenly there's something is starting to change. You know, for a reporter, you always think that's exciting. But in the past 2 years, I did notice that fear among Chinese Americans about speaking out is really has been getting greater. I've never seen this amount of fear among people. You know, last year when I did stories about how, was it last year or 2 years ago maybe, about how Chinese international students in this country go on the entrepreneurship, you know, how do they start their startups and things. I found a lot of people they don't want to talk about it. This to me sounds like a positive story, right? But the reason at that time, some people told me that I don't want to get unnecessary attention from the authority in this country because, you know, a lot of startup founders are either former students or scientists, scholars, you know, in STEM, in the STEM field, right? So that's highly sensitive. But at the same time, this year, just recently, I wrote a piece about the real estate market. You know, China used to be the #1 source of foreign buyers in this country, but this year there's a new survey came out, found that China slipped to #3. So that's the news, right? So I was just writing a real estate piece, and one of the realtors I interviewed, she said, oh, I thought this is only like made by the pandemic. When the pandemic is under control, I'm sure Chinese will come back because Chinese always have a longing for America. That I thought is an innocuous quote. So I was writing the draft. I have already finished the first draft. And she called me. She said, I don't want to be quoted. Can you take my quote out of the story? I said, why? She said, oh, I recently talked to people in China and I found their anti-American sentiment is very high. And I don't want to become a target if I say Chinese are always longing for the US. Normally, I won't allow this because, look, you agreed to do this and I've already finished the first draft. But in this environment, I can't tell her for sure that what you worried won't happen. You know, there's a great possibility it could happen. And my job is not only to report a news, but I also want to protect my source. So I took her quote out. This make my job more difficult. But, you know, in terms of like, how do I write stories? You know, I haven't changed. I still follow the same principles. I just hope like more people would would see more freedom to speak out.
Thank you so much for sharing those experiences and perspectives. Very sobering as I reflect upon how I, as a member of the academic community who study both Chinese and American societies, also face similar challenges. So thank you for sharing that. I would like to talk a bit more about the growing diversity within our community, the Chinese diaspora community. So I want to learn from your perspective in terms of socioeconomic backgrounds, where they are coming from, education, maybe income level, if you have those kind of information, even aspirations, reasons why they came to this country, right? What is our community like today compared to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? What's shaping those changes, both demographic, but also culture, values, a plan or aspiration for the future? What's your observation about those? Thank you.
Yeah, I think before 1965, when the Chinese Exclusion Act was completely lifted, Chinese Americans in this country are normally, you know, most of them are the offsprings of the early railroad workers. And most of them are from Guangdong or Taishan, the southern coastal area. But then after 1965, this country started to accept more Chinese immigrants. And those people are more educated people from Taiwan and some other South Asian countries, but they're Chinese as well. They came to this country to study. And that's a whole group of, I would say, first wave after 1965. And then after China's open door policy, more Chinese from mainland China come to this country. At first, they came here also for universities. So those are highly educated people. And then in the 1980s, especially the late 1980s through 2000, you see huge waves of smuggling trend from Fujian province. And so these are people who are less educated and has little money. They came here like just work in restaurants and blue collar labor and make their way to like probably sometimes middle class life. And this wave actually dying down a little bit when after 2010, maybe I would say 2010 is more clear that they were dying down because China's economy was developed so fast. So they found more opportunities in China. And then, excuse me, and then after that, we see like more wealthy Chinese grow up in richer China, like move to the US. This is what we call investment immigrants, or even the international students. They're from like more likely to from rich families or middle class families. So all these people, their views and their experience, and of course, as you mentioned, the purpose they come to the US are totally different. So I see this community is like, if it was possible to have one community voice before, and it's no longer possible. And I remember in the late 1990s, S.B. Wu, who used to be the deputy governor, the lieutenant governor for Delaware State, he started a committee called 80-20 Committee. His vision was, we are the Chinese Americans this is a small community. So we need to concentrate our votes to support in elections. We concentrate our vote to support one single candidate. This is the only way that we can draw attention to our political power. I think Mr. Wu is in his 80s now. I really don't know whether he will be able to see his vision fulfill in his lifetime. I think it looks like it's driven further and further from that. And in 2017, Frank Wu, this is an activist, right? He is now the president of Queens College. He wrote a piece in Huffington Post. His purpose was to call the liberal Chinese Americans to integrate with the new immigrants from China who are more likely to be conservatives. But that piece backfired because he said in the words like, oh, although the newcomers dressing in bling bling clothes and speak in loud voice, but indeed we're all Chinese. That's basically his point. But a lot of people, I think a lot of people in China were not happy with this, and they were like, "Oh, you American-born Chinese, you thought you're superior above us? Why you say we dress in bling bling, whatever." In 2019, 2 years later, I interviewed Frank Wu, and he used an analogy as marriage to describe the relationship between the American-born Chinese and newcomers, and he said, it's just like a marriage. Sometimes, you have bad days, you have good days, but still you stay in this marriage. But now the situation make me feel like can we hold this marriage up or is it possible there would be a divorce within this community?
That's so thoughtful, and it made me think. I think I have children who are Chinese Americans, and already, even though they are very young, they struggle with the identity issue. Who are they? They identify with both Chinese and American, but in terms of culture, sometimes language, and sometimes concrete debates, especially during the pandemic, when the virus is labeled as Chinese virus. It's very difficult. So maybe we talk a little bit about that. There's an amazing question in the Q&A box. I think it's super relevant. So the question is, I'd be interested in hearing more about your thoughts about the distinctions among China as a country, as a shorthand for the regime, and Chinese people. So unfortunately in English, China is often misused to refer to the regime. So the misuse may result in the dilemma of many overseas Chinese when they are trying to anchor their identity in something. This is so true. We are doing research among the Chinese communities here in this country, and we struggled with this, how to refer to this group of people. What we settled on is a term that's not so convenient, but it's accurate in terms of what we refer to. So it's the Chinese people of Chinese descent. And that's requires some definition, and we have measurements, but it is a challenge for us, right? So you must deal with this when you talk to people, but also when you write about this issue in both English and Chinese. So yeah, it would be wonderful to hear your thoughts on this issue. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I think this is an interesting question. It's also part of the major question that who am I, who are we, right? In Chinese, 华人, 华裔, and 中国人, the three words all have different meanings, but in English they're all Chinese. So this English word is not able to include all sectors, or is not able to distinct between the sectors of this whole community. I do think a lot of people, I think it's easier to say that a lot of immigrants, after certain years staying in this country, they would gradually, their self-identity would gradually evolve from 中国人, what we say is Chinese nationals, to 华人, Chinese, right? By ethnicity. But whether there is a straight line cutting by that point after your self-identity changed from 中国人 to 华人, but this is reasonable because a lot of people they may acquire American citizens, so they no longer per se, as Chinese nationals, but still inside your mind and in your heart, is it really possible to have a clear cut that from now on I have nothing to do with China. I'm only a Chinese American. I think for all human beings, like it's hard to totally abandon your roots and where you come from and all the culture and everything. But of course, now China only has one party. A lot of people may not agree with whatever the CCP is doing. So there is the need for some people that to distinguish, to just say, like, I'm using this term, I am a Chinese American, in order to make sure that I'm not agree with the CCP. But in terms of culture and country, I also sometimes I think, is it really necessary to push people to truth? Is it really not possible to have one person accommodate the feeling for both countries, but at the same time have their own judgment on what's right, what's wrong?
Thank you very much. Related to that, I realize since I came to this country and having been exposed to many different ethnic groups, languages, just broadly different cultures, both here in this country and globally, the identity is fluid. And sometimes you identify with some group that's not technically very related to you. So for example, when the Atlanta shooting happened, the label Asian woman became just very prominent to me. I felt, yeah, in this case, not technically Chinese or American. People see me as an Asian woman. So as they saw from the victims. And within my school community, I talked to other Asian women scholars and students. They feel the same way. And we have a natural connection. We feel both vulnerable, but also empowered. We have to do something. So this is very interesting. I wonder if you have thoughts about this as we talk about being a Chinese in this world and in America, but also we get to know and build relationships with many others. Sometimes we share a common identity. Sometimes we may not, but we feel some kind of connection or disconnection, right? All those help us form and think about identity. I wonder you have thoughts about those. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that after the Atlantic shooting, the word of integrate and the word like the identity, like the whole label as Asians, are once again buzzing, because I was afraid they were dying before the anti-Asian hate wave, because many people in this country realized Asians are the same. We're in the same category. In the 1980s, after the Vincent Chen case, and Vincent Chen was a Chinese American in Detroit, but he was beat to death by two white auto factory workers who mistaken him as a Japanese, because at that time Japanese cars came to America, took over the market. A lot of auto workers lost their jobs. So they had this resentment against the Japanese, but they instead beat to death Vincent Chen, a Chinese American guy. So after that, a lot of people in this country realized, oh, no matter you're from China, you're from Burma, wherever you come from, in the eyes of white people in this country, you're all Asians. You look similar, they don't bother to tell the differences between you guys. So the only way is we group together to fight against this. But during the process of this, when the community goes more and more diverse, it either in the whole Asian community or within the Chinese community itself, this idea of Asian has been like fading, because especially if you ask new immigrants from China, they definitely won't identify themselves as Asians. They won't even identify themselves as Chinese. I'm part of a Chinese community. They would just say, I am a Chinese from mainland China. Those are the people who have the great commonness as me. So that I feel like the old strategy or the traditional strategy that built by liberal Chinese Americans to work together with other Asians, not only with other Asians, but to work together with other minorities. We're all on the same boat. It has been collapsing in this new environment. But the anti-Asian wave reminded people that the situation now is no big difference from the situation in the 1980s when Vincent Chen was killed. Still, like in other people's eyes, you are all Asians, you're all the same people. You will all become scapegoat when they have something to, they feel like it's your fault. So I think an interesting layer of the identity issue is not only that how do you define yourself, but also what you look like in other people's eyes.
That is so true. And over the years, I've lived through so many experiences, big and small, right? The so-called microaggression that happens every day. When you publish the piece about how people cannot pronounce your name or know what's the first name, what's the last name, I mean, I thought this is exactly what's been on my mind. Once I joked with the colleagues, we should do a names test, spelling and pronunciation. And many would fail with the Asian names because that's just beyond them, regardless of whether it's 3 letters or 6 letters. So I think by just sharing about that, that's very powerful to let our community, but also other people know that's a problem. So I really applaud you for doing that and expressing on behalf of our group. Let's talk a bit more about the identity issue. There's a question in the Q&A box. This is interesting. This goes beyond a bit of our topic. So do you see similarities or differences in the identity of the overseas Chinese diaspora as they migrate to different regions of the world, such as North America, Africa, Latin America, Europe, Southeast Asia? For example, do you see overseas Chinese having a stronger Chinese identity in places like Southeast Asia, given the closer proximity to Asia and given the stronger similar culture and the language as opposed to other regions like Africa, the Caribbean, etc.? Very interesting question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think part of the strong feeling of their strong sense of the identity of people from mainland China is because of the rising of China in the recent years. And the economic development in China getting stronger. When China getting stronger, it also getting more and more assertive and more eager to express itself on the international stage. I think this actually affected a lot of immigrants from China to give them this clear idea that I want to be identified with my home country because it's stronger now. So I clearly feel new immigrants in the recent years who came to this country in the recent years are more likely to identify themselves with mainland China compared to people from other regions of the world. I would say yes, because those people from, say, African countries or Southeast Asians, they have this multi-layer of identities. You know, they're ethnically Chinese, but at the same time, some don't even speak Chinese language, right? They speak their home country's language, you know, be it Malaysia or I don't know, Namibia maybe. So for them, I think they don't likely to, they don't tend to identify with a country like China as a country. And their ethnicity side of identity is also not as strong because, you know, say if you're from Malaysia, Malaysia is a multiracial country as well. It's quite diverse. So I think there is this ambiguity among people, Chinese people from somewhere else, but still that when big things happened, you know, just like the Atlantic shooting or anti-Asian hate wave, when things like this happened, you feel like people's, they're more willing to be identified with a certain community, a certain group, because, you know, you can immediately feel in that kind of extreme situation that if you're alone, you're more vulnerable. So that's what I feel like going on right now.
Thank you. One thing I notice is people around the world, the Chinese diaspora around the world all tend to use Wechat. And that's a uniting fact. So, and how does the WeChat usage for sharing information, even passing along your posts, right? How does that work, and how does that shape the views of this group, how this group functions in this global context, of course, within the Chinese and American societies, but also beyond? Thanks.
Yeah, I think WeChat is a very interesting study case. Like I would say, without WeChat, Chinese Americans' political power won't be at today's level. The early protests, I'm not talking about the early in the 1980s or 1990s, but recently, the new wave of activism started in WeChat. I saw how the whole process that people organized protests when Peter Liang, the rookie cop, that you remember, the Chinese American rookie cop who accidentally shot dead a black guy, an innocent black guy. And then he was indicted, while some other white cops who probably did similar atrocities were just let go. So during that time, that was, I think it was 2015, something like 2014, 15, Chinese people started to gather on WeChat to organize protests one after another. And you also see how their organizing skills evolved on WeChat. At first they were like, yeah, let's go on the street. We'll all call for justice for Peter Liang. And then you see the dialogues in WeChat that some people realized that's not a right slogan, because you can't say call for justice because he did something wrong, right? So we want equality, because if white cops are not indicted, why you indict a Chinese cop? That's equality. That's not justice, right? So they changed their slogans. All these things they discussed it on WeChat, and how in the later stage, how should you pick up your garbage when you go out to participate in this kind of protests, and how should you deal with the situation if some black counter protesters were there, right? Don't escalate the situation, the conflicts. So all of this, you see, it took place on WeChat. But then, since the starting of the pandemic, and especially during the Black Lives Matters protests last May, you see a lot of misinformation regarding America flowing on WeChat freely. Some of them are from WeChat public accounts. The articles are just saying, exaggerating things in the US, exaggerating the chaos, and creating an atmosphere that America is declining and America is near an end. And I think a lot of Chinese users on WeChat kind of like susceptible to this kind of misinformation. But then when the vaccination started, this is a very interesting. I don't even know how to evaluate this. After the vaccination started, there are a lot of like a flood of misinformation, not only on WeChat, but on all social media platforms regarding like anti-vaxxers, like Bill Gates is trying to plant some chips in you through the vaccination. But on WeChat, if you compare WeChat and Twitter and Facebook, WeChat is quite clean. It's quite clean. Because I've been participating in a project of tracing the online misinformation. I'm in charge of the Chinese Chinese language social media platforms, and I couldn't find much on WeChat, but I found so much of this misinformation on Twitter and Facebook. That's because of the censorship, because China, it's not in China's interest to spread anti-vaxxer misinformation. So everything like the Bill Gates chips and this and that, the crazy things, whenever they were put out by some public account, they were immediately deleted by the censor. So now WeChat had become a good guy among all the others. But at the same time, Chinese American activists are also complaining that are, why they always delete my stories. I didn't even talk about China. I just talk about American local politics. Why do I have to go through the censors? So it's really a complicated case with WeChat.
That's fascinating. That's something I didn't realize. The double-edged sword of the WeChat censorship. So let's shift a bit and talk about the New York Times, a different media platform. When I came to the US 20 years ago, I mean, I immediately took up to read the New York Times because I could learn so much about the society, what's happening, also brush up my English. And 20 years later, it's still, of course, leading newspaper, but I think people have less trust in it. People, the subscription, I actually don't know the numbers, whether the paper is losing subscription. And of course, people have a more diverse, a rich set of other kind of media sources to look to, especially social media. So how is that from your view as a reporter who has won many awards writing for different kinds of outlets? And how's that going to change us going forward, right? We used to look to these great newspapers for truth, but what's the future? So I would appreciate your perspective on this.
I'll tell you just a little bit, very little things that I know about the New York Times, because I haven't been working with them for very long. But based on my very limited observation, a lot of things that people, like the reader, may seem by the readers as if the paper is biased or is taking side, are indeed rooted in their extreme cautions. Like they're so careful when they write about, say, ethnic media, especially the Black community. It's like I can give you an example that one of the pieces I wrote after Derek Chauvin, the cop who killed George Floyd, was convicted. I wrote that piece. This is one of the newsletter piece about. The piece was actually about the relationship between the Chinese community and the Black community, because that was the high time of the anti-Asian hate wave, and people in the Chinese community, especially on WeChat, are talking about some of the quite high profile cases. The predators are Black. So the kind of like either you can say it's misunderstanding or rift between the two communities was visibly widening at that time. So I thought, okay, that might be an angle to talk about Derek Chauvin and George Floyd and what Chinese plays in this puzzle. But then the editors of the Times don't think that's a good angle. They don't think it's appropriate. So we changed it into Chinese relations with the police. But even that, there is a line in the piece that I said some of the predators of the recent cases. I said the predators of the recent cases include some Black people, which worsened the misunderstanding between the two communities. Okay, the Times editor changed it into the predators, including people from all races and Black people. So you can see that in this line that what they want to emphasize, right? It's not only Black people, it's everyone else. But the key here in the views of Chinese in this community is, I don't care about, and this is the thing that I saw, I want you to talk about how do we deal with this Chinese, the relationship between our community and the Black community. So when this piece came out, you can see that for Chinese who think this is an issue, would say, hey, New York Times is so liberal, why do you always sided with the Black community over the Chinese community, right? Why do you always trying to smooth things for them? It's not. They just want to be very, very careful. They don't want to, to trigger unnecessary conflicts. So that's the thing. But bias, yes, it did exist. All media, I would say all media is biased because the reporters and editors were all limited. We're human beings. We're limited by our knowledge and our perspective and even the culture that we grew up with. So, as a journalist, we need to constantly remind ourselves that our view is limited, and we're not always right. We need to put more sensitive to all the issues we cover equally. Now I see this imbalance of sensitive that, in general, the mainstream media put in more sensitive with some racial community rather than the other. Some, like when they're covering domestic issues in America, they put more sensitive and they're more careful than they're covering foreign countries. Recently, there was a TV interview just maybe like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, right before Catherine Tai, the U.S. trade representative, had her talk with Liu He, the China part for that was their second trade talk, and the TV presenter interviewed Catherine Tai before this talk. One of the questions she asked was, like, you are a woman, so by China's culture norm, do you think if a woman lead this conversation, this negotiation, they will put less attention on you? And I was like, what is China's cultural norm? In like 1,300 years ago, we had the first empress, right? America so far doesn't even have a female president. And China's joining the WTO was, the negotiation was led by a woman. So but the thing is, that was pure ignorance. So a lot of those media bias are from the ignorance. As I said just now, that journalists should remind ourselves constantly that we're limited, but at the same time, I think the recipient sides, either whether it's China or Chinese community, should realize that a lot of times bias is not come from pure evil intention. So the best way to solve this problem is not to label everyone who made a mistake as public enemies. I actually personally don't know any journalists who have preformed your intention before they go to cover an ethnic community or go to cover China and just thinking, hey, let me find out how to smear this country or this community. But I do know quite several Western journalists who were pushed to the more hostile side by the people who they covered when they got a very nasty reception.
Thank you so much. That's so important and profound. I think we all, across cultures and society, grow up, revere the written word, right? That's why we look up to reporters, scholars who writers in general. And I think people don't often realize that reporters are human beings with bias like them. So that's very important for you to share from your perspective. I would like to ask you about your column, which is quite amazing. Every Thursday it comes out and reaches many readers, and I'm a loyal reader. It's been 6 months. Can you reflect upon, I guess from the beginning, how did you come to do this column and how it's been evolving? and whether you got any kind of reader response or even challenges or criticism. What kind of reader reaction you have been getting, and how's that shaping your future plans for continuing with this column? Thank you.
This is actually started by the New York Times. They had been thinking about launching a product like this for overseas Chinese for a long time. Before I before I started before I started to work for them. So what happened was during the pandemic, I started to write some pieces. The early stage of the pandemic, I started to write some pieces for the Chinese side, and at the same time, they were looking for people to do the newsletter. They have been experimenting on it, I think, for a long time. They couldn't find a satisfied product. So when they found me, they were like, "Oh, maybe you can do this for us." So we actually started in November last year. So by the time we published the first piece in late April this year, we had already been on the clinical trial for half a year. We have been like experimenting, like what's the format. The Times didn't really have a formed concept that what this newsletter should look like, but they do have a lot of things they know that they don't want. So they gave me a lot of like some guidelines that at first when I listened to them, I thought it was, gosh, this is a mission impossible, because they want it to be like you can't have your own opinions, but you have to have your own voice. And you can't have original reporting. And your job is to attract more Asian American, Chinese Americans living, overseas Chinese Americans. But at the same time, the majority of the Chinese, the Times Chinese language side, majority readers are in China. They're using the VPN, so you can't lose those already. Like the readers already there. And then you have to keep close to the hot topic. You're supposed to discuss some topics that everyone is talking about, but this is in weekly frequency. So I was like, I've never seen anything like that yet. I don't know how to do it. So we spent a long time to, adjusting. And the product you see at this time, I think, so far it seems like it's working. So now I was like, okay, then, it ends up like it's possible. All of this guidelines. The reader's reaction, because we don't have comments, we don't have the comment box under the article. So there is an email address that you can send your comments, but I don't directly get access to that email. I think some editors are dealing with that. I don't directly do that. So all the reactions I saw are from social media, mainly Twitter. And it's really interesting. Like you see, there is an article and you see people who click likes. There are a lot of people click likes, but those people are not likely to be the people who leave comments there, right? They just, if they like the story, they just click a like and they go. So those people who leave comments are mainly people who don't like the article. And there are three kinds of them. So every essay that we put out, I found like 1/3 of the commentators are people who are saying that I'm leaking the shoes of my American dad. And 1/3 are saying that I'm spreading propaganda for China. And the other 1/3 are people who just say New York Times is such an evil creation in general. I don't really know whether these people really read the article. I think they have the lines already formed and they're just lurking there. And every time when they see something, they just push it out. So does it change anything I write, shape the newsletter? I don't think so, because I really don't see much valuable comments there. But I do notice there's one trend of comments that I think is a very thin sliver, but I think they have some reason there. They said every time, like when we have to mention China and things, and they would be like, hey, are you gonna die if you don't mention China? Why do you always falsely bring China in? And I think that's yes, we are. Like every time we have to bring China in, but that's really not because of an evil thoughts from the editors or me. It's only because that they just want to attract more Chinese readers, and that's the way they thought it will work.
Thank you so much. Those are, I mean, amazing. That's a crystal reflection of the dilemmas we face, right? As a writer, you face, but also as the Chinese diaspora who are in this country in the double bind. I want to ask you a final question before we move on to the Q&A. So you're a writer, and I feel, even though I'm a different kind of writer, I'm also a writer. So I appreciate the effort, and I think what you just said, you keep your voice and you try to keep it objective. That's both important values. I just want to learn a bit more about your writing practice in general, but also when you craft this column, it has a space limit, and you have to also have a theme each week. So at my school with a colleague, I started this series of lectures called Writing Lives. We invite different writers, some at advanced stages, some beginning stages, to reflect upon their writing practices, challenges, and breakthroughs. So I would love to hear from you how you write, how you pick a theme and craft the paragraphs so that your voice and the message you still want to deliver come through, and whether it's similar or different when you write in English versus in Chinese. Thank you.
The pieces for this newsletter actually are quite challenging because I'm more used to write longer version of articles. You know, normally I write 3,000 words or even like 6,000 words in Chinese. But of course, yeah, the limited space doesn't allow that. But at the same time, all the topics we discussed are quite complex. So I do spend a lot of time thinking that how do I make like a clear narrative in about a complicated topic in such limited space. What I normally do, this is not only for this essays, but also for all the stories I write, no matter how long they are. I often have a headline first. This headline normally is the editor's job, but for me, this is just my habit. If I don't have a headline, I can't start. I just don't know where to start. So I always have a headline formed, and I always have to know where's my first line, where's my last line. So before I shaped the whole piece, I'd already have a starting line and an ending line. So I know where I'm from and where I'm going. That would make things easier. And the other other part of this is just do a thorough research. I normally would look at social media to learn what people think on this, what are they talking about. Although I can't really do original reporting, but I still need to see, what people are interested in. So I'll incorporate that element in my writing, and all the rest is just my own thoughts about the topic. I'm like I for 20 years in this country, I've been thinking every day of some strange topics. So all the topics I write, I probably have already thought about before and at some stage. So I'll bring those in. Yeah, that's when I really started to write, the process was actually quite quick because everything has already in my mind. In terms of writing in English and Chinese, Professor Gao, you write in both languages as well. You must know this. In the early days, I felt like when my English was not as strong, it's still not very strong, but in the early days, it was even much weaker. I felt like I had two computer operation systems in my mind. So it always like conflict with each other. And so I always got this brain dead moment that I have to stop and reboost. And especially, one of the Chinese contemporary writers that I love, probably the one that I love the most is Wang Xiaobo. I got to know his works long before he got popular. So when I came to the US, I brought two of his books, and it's magic. In the early days, when I write, if I had to write some English pieces, I couldn't read Wang Xiaobo's work beforehand. If I read his book, all the English language system that built in my mind would collapse because there is some rhythm in his book that will immediately drag me back to the Chinese language. It's just magical like that. No other Chinese language works and books or articles had that effect on me. So I had to stop reading those books, although I love them so much. I can tell you, that two books, I haven't read them in the recent 10 years. But now I don't, maybe like now I feel like I got more confidence in writing English. Probably I can try it again to see whether the effect is still there. But that's what happened before.
That's unbelievable. You can give it a try today. Let's see what happens. That's fascinating. So I want to invite our audience members to enter any questions to the Q&A box. We have two questions. The first one continues our earlier conversation about identity and generations. So the question is how descendants of the first wave of the diaspora, for example, from Guangzhou or Fujian, are viewed by Chinese nationals right now. On the one hand, America seems to often be seen as the gold standard of a rich, developed country. But on the other hand, the immigrants from the first waves are often from poor families and often disconnected from China in a way that is seen as disappointing. So the question is if these two negative impressions also influence how Chinese immigrants are viewed, both here and in China, maybe. Thank you.
I think, yeah, there are quite conflicts between the early generation of Chinese immigrants and the newcomers I can see. The dissidents from Guangzhou, the early generation immigrants who have been here for a long time. Before the newcomers came, they had already established their life in this country. And Chinatown has more than 100 years history. So when in the 1980s, when the Fujianese started to come, there are a lot of fights in Chinatown because the Fujianese had to land in Chinatown as well. That's the only place they know that they can survive. So the early generation of Guangdong Cantonese and the Fujianese had to fight for the limited space that they can survive. So in the 1980s and 90s, there were a lot of even gangs, Chinese gangs, Fujianese gangs, and Cantonese gangs, and they really had fierce fights all the time. And then later, when the newcomers from mainland China, who tend to be more affluent, come to this country, I do see some resentment among the older generation Chinese. Because before this new wave, when the time I came to the US in 2000, when you go to Chinatown, if you don't speak Cantonese, they consider you as foreigner. They don't think you're Chinese. You know, Cantonese for them is the official Chinese language. And if you don't speak Cantonese, you try to buy something in the shops, they don't want to serve you. But then later, when the newcomers come who are richer, who can afford a lot of things, shops in Chinatown adapt. You know, a lot of shop owners, the older generations, started to learn how to speak Mandarin. But still, I remember at one event at the Chinese American, the Museum of Chinese Americans, they had this talk that they invited some older generation of immigrants, and a daughter of an older generation immigrants who grew up in Chinatown said, "No, you know, when I he came here when he was like 6 or 7 or something. So when I just came here, I didn't speak English. So I went to school. I was looked down. I was bullied because I didn't speak English. So I learned to speak English. Now I speak Cantonese and English. And now I am looked down by the richer people from China because I don't speak Mandarin. And you guys come to Chinatown, you complain about, oh, it's so dirty, it looks like old fashioned, it looks like just a village in China. You don't know how much work and how much struggle we put in that, you know, we have this Chinatown maintained like this. So I think that, you know, I was very touched at that moment. And I think he's right. We, like Chinese from in different categories, do not tend to communicate with each other that often. And we don't understand what experience each other has had, you know, their efforts, their thoughts, and you know, their common pursuits and their common dreams that we don't know that exist. So I think that's a big lesson for me, and I think from then on, I really like tried intentionally to help both sides to understand each other better.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. The other question continues this train of thought about generations. So the question is, I'm curious about your thoughts on the growing population of the parachute generation, the younger Chinese students from China to the US, specifically those who arrive in the States prior to attending college. Following COVID, the rise of travel bans, visa regulations, and quarantine restrictions, these have placed many young students in difficult situations, such as being unable to return home or having to take care of themselves in a foreign country. How do you think these students' identities are shaped or influenced by the China-US relationships today? Do you observe any trends in the path they take? Thank you very much.
I think the younger generation of international students, I would say that if I were a parent, I probably won't send my kids to the US so early because I've seen many of them they really struggled at first.
Somehow I cannot hear you anymore. No, I think somehow we lost your sound. Now, yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I was just saying that I've seen so many struggles of these younger international students. You know, and also another thing is they tend to stay together with themselves, and I won't blame them because, you know, when you're a teenager, you need friends, and you come to a country that nobody, you know no one, right? So you, of course, you tend to stay with your own people. And also this staying with your own people concept, it's not only among Chinese international students, it's also like you see in America, the American colleges that when the new semester starts, people tend to stay with their, you know, others they're familiar with from their hometown, from the same high school, have the same backgrounds. So that's just a common thing. But I think whether the current China and US conflicts would shape their view of the world and their view of the China-US relationship, I think this will be a good topic that we, it's worth a lot of pieces to, worth writing and worth observing, because
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you again. Can you try again? No, sorry. Yeah, still cannot. Yes, you're back.
You can hear, okay.
Yes.
I'm saying that maybe some young people did this because they don't want their parents to hear that how much they struggled here. I do know a lot of young people, they don't tell their parents what happened here. But I know other people in the Chinese communities who are trying to help these children, provide them some home-like environment. Those people tell me that the mental health among young international students from China are kind of severe now. It's getting worse, and especially during the pandemic. So I think this might be something that really worth watching. But before we all we hope Chinese international students could become, after they study, they have some experience in this country, would become the bridge to bridge China and the US. Whether that is still the case now, I still think it's possible, but I do see more and more people, younger generation, or those who came here for college or graduate schools, tend to go back, to leave this country after their graduation. This was sharply compared to the situation probably 5 or 10 years ago, when everyone wanted to find a job in this country at first, at least. So that is definitely changing.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for the final question. This question is, I'm wondering, especially in this time when Chinese nationalism is rising, what changes are you seeing in the interactions between overseas mainland Chinese and Taiwanese people in the US, especially given mainland rhetoric around corrupting Western influences in Taiwan?
I think what's interesting is the overseas Chinese, or say immigrants, no matter which country they come from, tend to be less charged by the conflicts between their home country and other countries. It's not only among mainlanders and people from Taiwan, but also you see people from Pakistan, India, and they tend to get along well with each other in Jackson Heights. But still, I do see some quarrels, some conflicts on Wechat, but that's not triggered originally by the conflicts between over the street, but it's more likely to be triggered by their different views on Trump or the vaccination, or things like that. So when the conflicts, when the argument started by something else, and then it's ignited, and then it will slide to the territory, the area where all the sensitive topics would be brought up. And then people started to yelling at each other. They started to use the curse word, the worst curse words I've ever seen in Chinese language against each other. But really, I think it's interesting that I rarely see anything like that started directly by Taiwan and China.
Excellent, thank you. We have 4 more minutes, so I invite you to share some final thoughts on our theme, the dilemma of the Chinese diaspora in the decoupling era. I was trying to find the answer. What's the future like, right? What are some possibilities and solutions? I wonder if you have some insights into that. Thank you.
Oh, well, what's the future look like? I hope I have the crystal ball. Neither of us, none of us have the crystal ball. So all I can say is we'll just, keep watching, and then I'll keep writing, and I'll try to, as I always have been doing, help different, people from different groups to understand each other better. I think if you put away the ideology limits or preformed concepts, and just view each other as human beings, probably you will see, like, that person or that group of people are less hateful. They have more similarities with you. It happens that when I cover the Trump supporters, and Chinese Trump supporters, they are very vocal too, and a lot of liberal Chinese think, oh, those people, we just have no possibility that we can talk with them, but it's not the case. When I interviewed them, I found, like, people's view are all based on their own personal experience, their culture, their life. And you may not agree with their views, but how did they reach to that view? Their life experience, that's valuable. That's worth watching and worth talking about. So I think, although I don't agree with a lot of views of Trump supporters, but I do respect what they have experienced in their life. So I think that probably is a way that we should all try to see that, whether you can use it to make life easier, to make, like, the way that you deal with other people in a less charged atmosphere. At the same time, I also want to encourage overseas Chinese to speak up and speak out. I know that it could be dangerous, and even like what we talk about today could be, provide a lot of fodder for the internet show. But I think if we don't speak up, things would be worse. No one would know what do you think, and what do you think is no longer valuable for anyone anymore. So of course, I think even based on my own profession, I think we should all speak up.
I fully agree with you. We do research, but I think as researchers, we try to advance science, but also need to take a stand for certain things. I agree with you. So I invite all of our audience members to sign up to Rong Xiaoqing's weekly newsletter, which is quite amazing. A newsletter called Overseas Chinese Journal, hosted by the New York Times. And I thank you all, old friends, new friends, for joining us today for this very rich dialogue. And thank you, Xiaoqing, for sharing your experiences, insights, and a lot of very inspiring ideas for me. So thank you very much. Thank you all.